You know that person who still memorizes phone numbers? The one who can fix something with duct tape. Wait patiently in silence. And doesn't panic when the Wi-Fi drops? Yeah, that's not random. That's someone who grew up in the 70s or 80s. If you're someone who remembers riding bikes until the streetlights came on, who drank from the hose without a second thought, who learned lessons the hard way instead of through a screen, welcome. You're about to feel very seen. Today, we're breaking down the psychology of people who grew up in the 70s and 80s. The generation people call old school. But science calls something else entirely. Here's the thing. Kids of the 70s and 80s grew up in an analog world. No smartphones. Not lots of constant notifications. Not instant answers. If you wanted to talk to someone, you called their house. And if the parent picked up, you had to speak. That does something to a brain. Psychologists talk about delayed gratification, the ability to wait, to earn, to tolerate boredom. And boredom back then wasn't a crisis. It was normal. You waited for your favorite show once a week. You rewound cassette tapes with a pencil. You save allowance for months for one thing you really wanted. That wiring creates patience. And patience builds resilience. But there's more going on than just nostalgia. People who grew up in that era tend to have a higher tolerance for discomfort. Not because life was perfect, because it wasn't cushioned. You fell off bikes. You fought your own battles. You figured things out without Google. Problem solving wasn't optional. It was survival. And here's something interesting. Studies show that unstructured play and independent exploration build stronger executive function and creativity. When no one is constantly entertaining you, your mind learns to entertain itself. That's why many from that generation can sit alone with their thoughts. They don't need constant stimulation. Silence doesn't scare them. It feels familiar. Now let's talk about trait 3. Loyalty. Growing up before social media meant relationships were physical, local, and slower to form. You saw the same neighbors, the same classmates, the same community. You didn't unfollow. You worked through things. That builds a different kind of attachment. Not disposable, durable. But let's be honest. Society romanticizes youth culture. Fast trends, viral moments, reinvention every 6 months. The world moves quicker now, louder now, more reactive. And sometimes people who grew up in the 70s and 80s feel out of sync. Too direct, too blunt, too independent, maybe even emotionally unavailable. Here's the darker side. Some learn to suppress feelings, to walk it off, to not talk about mental health. Independence sometimes meant isolation. Strength sometimes meant silence. And for some, that toughness became armor that's hard to take off. So it's important to ask, are you self-reliant because you're strong? Or because no one ever taught you how to lean? Because one is confidence. The other is survival mode. But for those who integrated both sides, something powerful happened. They developed quiet confidence. They don't need constant validation. They don't overshare. They don't crumble at minor inconvenience. They adapt. They endure. They remember a world that didn't revolve around them. And that perspective builds humility. Hit subscribe if you grew up in that era and recognize yourself in this. Psychologists often link this mix of independence, patience, and loyalty to what's called internal locus of control. The belief that your actions matter more than circumstances. When you grew up fixing your own problems, that belief becomes embedded. So if you're someone who can be alone without feeling lonely, who values face-to-face over filtered, who doesn't chase every new trend because you've already seen cycles come and go, you're not outdated. You're calibrated differently. Tell me, do you think growing up in the 70s and 80s built stronger people? Or just tougher ones? And if you want to understand the one hidden trait this generation has, that younger generations secretly envy but will never admit, the next video is going to hit deeper than this one. Click it. You'll understand why.